Good evening. Welcome to Backstory with Joan Goldstein. The focus of my show tonight is tax assessment or reassessment in Princeton and the disagreements that have evolved since then. My guest tonight is Jim Firestone. He was on my show, in fact, as a guest back in 2010, along with former Mayor Jim Floyd and Alan Hegedus. That's when we first started talking about tax reassessment. This time, Jim has come as the co-leader of the Princeton Fair Tax Reevaluation Group, and he has brought a great deal of information for us to show us just exactly what are the problems and what are the implications or problems that will come from the enforcement of this. Jim is a geographer, amongst other things, a PhD in geography. He's also worked for 30 years as a real estate broker, and he's also been the head of the Princeton Real Estate Group for 5 years, and is extremely interesting and intelligent. Jim, why don't you start by telling us why there is a problem? Why is tax reassessment now a problem in Princeton?
Well, in the past it hadn't been a problem. There were small increases in the assessments, small increases, small decreases, as the assessor tells it. 1/3 went up, 1/3 went down, and 1/3 stayed the same. But what happened this time was there were huge increases in different parts of town and large decreases in other parts of town, and nobody could explain why. They theorized about it for a while, but nobody still knows why it happened. So we decided we had to look into it, and I went down to the Witherspoon-Jackson neighborhood to Jim Floyd's community meeting and sat with people and listened to the misery they were going through with 30 and 60% increase in their taxes, and it was unbearable to them. Mm-hmm. So what ended up happening was I suggested to the people there that with my experience in the field of real estate that I could help them appeal perhaps. I understood what their values should be, and I got them to come to the church on 4 different nights and sit there and make appeals to the county so that they could get their taxes, get their assessments adjusted, which are directly related to what they pay in taxes.
What was it about the changes in the taxes in these communities, or specific communities, that made it seem unfair, or we say maldistribution, bad distributions?
Well, what happened was at first they looked like assessor errors all over the place. I realized that night. I was going back and forth to people's houses and told them I can't really give them a figure unless I go to your house and take a look. And I'd take a quick look in their house and come back to the church. And I realized after a while that there were a lot of errors and they didn't make sense to me. So then I began walking the district after that and looking for more errors to see what was actually there. I actually invited the elected officials to go, and several came with me. Mm-hmm. And we walked through these errors. But then I did a report on the duplexes that were down in the Witherspoon-Jackson area. There were about 40 of them. And when you looked at them, they seemed to be so overrated compared to places like Spruce Street or other areas of town where there are duplexes. And I became worried when I saw all of these overtaxed by what I thought was about $100,000. To me, that was like a pattern was starting to emerge.
Overtaxed by at least $100,000
per house assessment.
That's quite a large figure.
It's a very large figure.
Right. So that raises a lot of questions. And you looked at it in terms of methodology. What methods were they using? What patterns were it represented? And what did it bespeak of in terms of our population, in terms of our community?
Well, what we had to do was we had to go back first and try to figure out why this happened, mm-hmm. specifically in that area. Mm-hmm. And when you start really looking for it, they made up a sample for us to see. It turned out that we received it from the county administrator for taxes, Marty Gould, and we looked at this sample of a neighborhood and how they did it. And I found so few statistics there that were used that I realized after taking courses in college statistics, you could never generalize from these sort of figures. So it must really be more of an art than a science. And
also not all of the taxes assessments went up, some went down. So
Some
that
went down.
gave you a basis of comparison. So if you could have theorized about it, who went down, who went up, what's up and down?
Well, we looked at these statistics, the ones in each of the samples, and realized each one of those are related to an assessment area in the town, a neighborhood. And so which neighborhoods were hit by which samples? Right. How many samples were taken? We found that almost half of the districts in the township had either one sale that they were using as a comparable or no sales. That meant to me that it was highly subjective what was going to happen as the statistical sample in that area. So the danger signs went up. I knew that a professor of statistics would tell me, he'd throw out my paper and give me an F if I generalized that way. So why don't we have something better coming out of the assessment business than that? Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of room for improvement in the assessment business. Mm-hmm. So I kept after that, and then, just by luck, a fellow named John Crumler, is related to Jenny, her husband, made a map of the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And in his map, he Googled it, used some icons and figures that he set up, and I got a copy of a map. Well, when I put my hands on that, I was really fortunate because my background was being a geographer and also being a real estate broker for 30 years. I know where the housing is and what kind of housing to look for and where the patterns would be. There the patterns were all over the map. And in the first map of the Witherspoon-Jackson area, the pattern showed up as bright red increases that were over 60% in taxes or assessments. They're both the same, essentially, directly related. It's 0 to 30 is is with a yellow icon, 30 to 60 with a pink, and the larger increases are above 60. Well, when you look at that whole neighborhood, it looks like it's got a epidemic going on of some kind, mm-hmm. right in the middle of Princeton. Mm-hmm. And yet, that same neighborhood, there are two portions of it, one in the borough and one in the township. It's split by a line. It's all similar housing, but it increased at two different rates. So the borough increased by 26%, and the township portion, which is Birch and Lee Avenue, increased by over 55%. How can you explain that?
Mm-hmm. And it ended up that you couldn't explain it.
You couldn't explain it.
So you took it a step further and said, okay, let me see if we can map this out, get this information, map it out, and so look at a picture of what's going on. So you have those maps with you, don't you?
Yes, I do.
Would you like to show some of those maps?
Yes, I would.
Good. Go right ahead.
And here is the first one, which is a map of the Witherspoon-Jackson neighborhood. You can see it where I have the little icon on, a little symbol on it, the hand. And I'm pointing at, that's the township portion there, which is Birch and Lee Avenue. There's Community Park out beyond it. And there's 206 coming along into the borough to Nassau Street.
Could you repeat again, what do the colors represent?
The red is extreme increase, which is over 60%. Pink is 30 to 60. Yellow is 0 to 30. And as you look at it, you see the borough portion over here coming up Witherspoon Street. Notice that. That is a 26% increase. So there's no reason why this should have increased differently on either side of the same neighborhood just because it's across the boundary line of the municipality, because this is 100% assessment for each. Mm-hmm. So what you realize is also, oh, are there other patterns here that I'm not looking at?
Right.
And the other pattern that's here is, on the west end of Princeton, where my little hand is going on the map, over in this area, you'll see a lot of green arrows. And the green arrows represent a 0 to 30% decrease. There's an occasional blue arrow over there also, and that's above 30% decrease. Well, nobody could explain why that was decreased, because those houses didn't decrease in value. Your realtors know that. They didn't go down. So, but when you do an assessment, if you push up the assessment of some people, like you did over here, in order to balance your budget, your same amount of taxes that you're taking in, you have to decrease them elsewhere. And where did they decrease them? In probably one of the most wealthy part of the neighborhoods in town, where houses are generally $1.5 million to $4 million. So notice there across the township line also, where my little hand is going, see all the yellow arrows? For some reason, that little district in the township portion went up, which is, again, across the township line. So I'm going to show you a few other maps now as we go along. We're going to switch to a second map.
So as you're searching for the map, I'm
Yes.
just commenting that it looks as if the wealthier, larger homes, or what you refer to as the mega mansions, were given tax breaks, while the smaller and less wealthy homes were given higher tax assessments. So I mean, I'm the sociologist, you're the geographer. We put our heads together and we said, what is going on here? What do these patterns bespeak of? And though they may be unintended consequences, they nevertheless have consequences for the people who live there. For example, some of the consequences could be that some people could not afford the new taxes and would force them to move away. And therefore, as you've pointed out in your wonderful paper, this would reduce the diversity in the community as well. So that that would be one ramification of it. Another would be that some people's children could not inherit the homes because they could not afford the taxes, and that would drive them away. So ultimately, whether it was intended or unintended consequences, the results of these assessments is that some people would be driven out of the community. And therefore, it begins to look as if, well, I can't use the word discrimination, but it begins to look as if this I'll be very neutral, population shift. Some kind of population shift occurring as a result of the tax assessments.
A tremendous pressure is being put upon all these older houses in Princeton. We realized finally that it was not just the Witherspoon-Jackson area.
Right.
It was also the area north of Valley Road, for instance. If you look over here, look to where Jefferson Road starts, outside the borough line here, right here. This is a lot of pink and yellow arrows also going up. This is Jefferson. This is Moore Street right here. And there you have the high school, which is fortunately enough untaxed still. But look at all the increases in that whole area, that whole quadrant. That's the one big tax quadrant that joined in with us and said, hey, we're really getting hit. And we can't understand why. We have no idea what's happening here except somebody built a few mega mansions near us. And they included those in the sample because they're built recently, and every year some builders build a few more. But the mega mansions are 2 and 3 times the average, are 3 and 4 times the average value of houses there.
Yeah.
So when you add them into the sample, all of a sudden you skew everybody else's value up.
That's right.
So look, now what I'll do now is move over further to the line below the shopping center. And I'll just take a second on the map again. There we go. Here we go, south of Princeton Shopping Center. There we go. Okay. Okay, there's Princeton Shopping Center, as you can see. Look at the region just to the south of it, which is Clearview Avenue here. And notice there's a lot of pink and a lot of yellow arrows in there. So now what do we do? You come down further into the borough and you see a lot of green finally developing, which is going down to where Hamilton Avenue is. Well, the borough line runs just about here, right across here. And what you're seeing again is two different districts that should be similar are not similar. And they're all Cape Cod houses, essentially, built by Mr. Potts after the Second World War. But they're older housing again. Mm-hmm. So we started to see this pattern emerge of smaller, older houses being overtaxed compared to larger, newer houses. And this directly translates over to a place called the Princeton Ridge, which I'm going to take you to now. Here we go. Now, get a look at the Princeton Ridge. All of the housing virtually on the Princeton Ridge, with the exception of that little area where the hand is, that's the old part of Ridgeview Circle. Those were older, smaller houses. But the rest of the ridge, which has been built with many, many glorious homes, all had a decrease in their assessment. And the question is why? They didn't go down in value. They didn't go down in value proportionate to anybody else even. But they got a huge decrease. So we think that this method that was used now is systematically flawed. Mm-hmm. And there's several things that explain it. One of the last of which I'll show you in the Riverside section. Now look at that, you see the ridge there. It's the same all the way along it. Most of the ridge was not built on until 30 years ago. So we know that newer housing is getting a special treatment out of the system that's being used. I'm going to take you to the last part, which is Riverside. Oops, here's Riverside. Here we go.
And this would be older housing stock or?
Here it comes.
Newer housing stock would be at Riverside?
There's Riverside.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Now you know, here's Carnegie Lake over here. See that? That's Carnegie Lake on that edge. And see the increases along Carnegie Lake of all the housing along there that's pink and red? Mm-hmm. Well, those are the mansions that were built on the lake. But what it did was, because it was considered in the same assessment district as all the other houses in Riverside, it was a big block, it influenced all of Riverside to be up by about $100,000 in their assessments. But the rest of these people in Riverside did not have lake frontage. So why were the mega mansions put in with them? Lake frontage is, waterfront is waterfront. You don't get waterfront on Knoll Drive or Longview Drive. You just have small ranch houses that are basically ranches and split levels that were developed on half-acre lots. These people should not be taxed or influenced by the lakefront district. So some of these district lines were drawn improperly also.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So what you did is you took some action here too. You've taken some action here in terms of trying to encourage citizens to get involved, and what is it that you're suggesting that they do? And also you've made this incredible website available. Can you tell us about the website you've put together with the help of, is it Ed Schreyer? Have you helped put the website together?
Ed Schreyer did a great deal with it, as did Tom Pyle. And between the two of them, they came up with a wonderful website that can do all kinds of things for people to understand their taxes better. They've developed a whole new system, Ed has, for going into the assessment to find the patterns. And as you'll see now, I just flicked the computer to put it on to Google Earth again. Mm-hmm. And you can see all these little arrows pointing up and down for whether the increase was up or down. And on any specific arrow, I'll take just this one for instance here. You click on it, and what happens? You find the percentage change in the assessment for that property, whether their taxes went up or down and how much. Mm-hmm. And you can do that in your own neighborhood now. We're putting that on our website soon, and it'll only be a few more days and we'll have it up and running. people can start to look at these patterns all over the map.
And they can look at their own property.
And they can take the map itself,
Right.
run the cursor all over it, and they can go from neighborhood to neighborhood. Do you know what they'll find when they do? They'll find out that the people, for instance, who are near the Hun School on either side of Russell Estates, around the Hun School, everything went up because of few mega mansions being built. But the new houses in Russell Estates all went down, basically, or most of them went down, because they're almost new. I mean, new is anywhere from, let's say, 0 to 20 or 30 years old. That's new housing. So just north of that, Constitution Drive and Independence Drive, they went up also. The same thing is true out on off of Rosedale. Audubon Lane is older housing, 50 years old. What happened there? They went up in their assessments and their taxes. What happened next to them? Right next to them is Edel Farm. Almost all of Edel Farm went down. And on the other side of that, as you go along Rosedale Road, is Brooks Bend. And Brooks Bend, again, almost all of them went up in taxes. So you're seeing this whole pattern that runs all the way across the community. When it has a pattern like that, that's wrong. What it should have is assessor's errors here and there. It should just be measles. It should be randomly spread all over the map, not big blotches of change like that. That is discriminatory, and the system that we've developed is going to help anyone in any community, if they eventually do this, to their own community and just Google the things on it. They're going to be able to understand their taxes, whether their taxes are fair or not fair. And unfortunately, that's not coming out of the assessment company that we've had do our job here. They've tried to use this method called the extraction method to make the assessment seem more friendly to people, and in some ways it did.
Well, to some people it was more friendly too, yes.
But in the end, they lacked any quality control over what their product was, and they need this quality control.
So you're basically doing the job
They
for
need
them,
to do what we've been doing for
Yes,
them.
right. Well, also you're encouraging people. What can people do then? For example, you have formed this organization, and people have been joining. Haven't you been getting more and more? You have like what, almost 50 people now or so?
No, we've always had a lot of people. We've filled the township hall twice with over 200 to 225 people. The third time we filled it to capacity again in the middle of the winter. But what we finally asked was, if we were not going to get our elected officials to demand that the assessment be redone, the only remedy you have finally is to overthrow it. And to overthrow it, you have to institute a lawsuit. So we asked the other night, we asked the public to come on board and help us with it. We had 13 checks already from different people of $100 or more, substantial, not small. And guess what? We now have 48 checks a few days later.
Yes.
And people, those are just people who want to be along with us as founders and practice the democracy that we have the way democracy ought to be practiced, which is put your money where your mouth is and do something. And people seem to feel strongly about that. So we're proceeding in that direction, and we still hope that the municipalities will help out. We still hope that ASI will come back and try to correct the wrong that was done.
Explain who ASI is.
ASI is the Appraisal Systems Incorporated.
Who did the original work.
work.
You're hoping they'll come back and check their work or recheck their work. Is that what you're hoping from
Well,
them?
there are three different ways that this can happen. They could come back and check their work. They could enter in a different system of lots from the beginning, which would help. They could improve the samples that were taken from each neighborhood by extending the time period on either side to look at each one of those samples better. All that could be done without a huge expenditure of going house to house. They've gone house to house. I didn't think the work was that best house to house, because they generally took 2 minutes, and the neighbors all complained about it, which is saying, hey, you have to spend longer in my house than that to judge what my house value is, because the realtors spend about an hour or two. there's a lot that can be done.
So this is this wave now that you have. You have the data. People have access to the data. This
Right.
is as you talk about democracy, is opening the door on information so that people can see for themselves and think for themselves about, and not feel helpless in that kind of situation. And what you hope to do then is, or have you already instituted a lawsuit? Is that already in action or not?
No, we have not instituted the suit. We've collected the funds so that we
Right.
know that we can. We're ready to. If that's what we have to do,
Yeah,
that's what we have to do.
You're not going to back away
People
from this,
people
yeah.
are starting to talk about
Right.
a petition also as a
Yes.
final thing to the government to tell them that the people still see it as an issue. It has not gone away. And you cannot correct it next year by just redoing a portion of the assessment. The way the assessment is set up is $3 million is transferred every year for the next 10 years over from people who have to pay more taxes as a windfall to people who can't understand why their taxes went down. That money is still on the table even when the assessor comes out and says, oh, I'm going to help some of these people who got hurt on this side of the table. Well, the money is still on the other side of the table. That's not coming back unless you redo the whole assessment.
Okay, so one of the steps you're taking, besides documentation of the process, would also, it's giving it a visual picture so that that's easier for people to understand if they see the different color coding and say, oh my goodness, you know, this is, the rich seem to be getting richer, the poor seem to be getting poorer. There's some kind of pattern here. So you've done that, which is essential. You're attracting people who need to know, and you're making the information available to them. You're suggesting a mode of action, which might be a lawsuit. How about the public local officials? How have they responded to these concerns? What do they feel?
Well, the elected officials have set up a commission to study the problem, but they're at the point where they've taken so long to do this and to come to the table and do this, to start their work. We're trying to help that commission figure out what went wrong.
Okay.
But I'm not really sure that, I mean, we may run out of time to actually overturn the reevaluation.
Time is
if-
always another factor, isn't it?
Time is another factor with regard to the courts, because you have to perform in a timely fashion if you want to do this. And so we're in a pinch where we're going to have to make a decision about doing that.
Okay. So
And
this is
the commission, though, is I have a lot of respect for the people who are on it. They're smart people. We are cooperating with it, but we did not want to be part of it because we were afraid that this whole thing might be covered up. I don't have that fear any longer. I think those people are going to take a good solid look at
Great.
it.
Once again, we're talking about democracy in action. Now, this is something that could happen in any community, so it's not only relevant to Princeton, it's relevant to anywhere in the country. This is a kind of concern, and it's a happy thought to think there are people still out there who take action and who use their minds and use their talents. So I know there's a great deal more we could talk about, but we seem to be coming to the end of the show, and I want to thank you so much for coming today, sharing all your incredible knowledge and your maps and your work and your hard work, and just feel good about the fact that people like you exist in this world. And thank you very much for coming today to Backstory with Joan Goldstein.
Thank you, Joan.
Thanks, Jim.